What happens when an undercover CEO discovers that his thriving business is actually a nightmare for the employees keeping it afloat? Long hours, toxic managers, and a corporate system that ignores the people doing the real work. He thought he knew his company, but the reality hits harder than he ever expected. As he struggles to keep up with the brutal workload, he faces a choice: ignore what he's seen or step up and make real change. This isn't just a social experiment, it's a battle between leadership and responsibility. Let's dive into the story and see what happens next. Nathan Reynolds sat in his sleek corner office, staring at the latest batch of employee reports flooding his inbox. The numbers painted a troubling picture: high turnover rates, plummeting job satisfaction, and complaints about grueling hours. His company, Roast & Co., had started as a passion project, a single cozy cafe where he once pulled espresso shots himself. Now, it was a massive nationwide chain with hundreds of locations. Growth had been fast and profitable, but somewhere along the way, the soul of the business had been lost. Nathan, now in his 40s, hadn't stepped inside one of his cafes in years, let alone worked a shift. He made decisions from the comfort of conference rooms and quarterly earnings meetings, but how much did he really understand about what his employees went through every day? A recent internal survey revealed the grim reality: workers felt undervalued, overworked, and unheard. A particularly scathing comment stood out in his mind: "Corporate has no idea what it's like down here. We're just numbers to them." That line hit him harder than he expected. Nathan had built Roast & Co. on the idea of community and quality service, but if his employees were suffering, how much of that vision still remained? The HR department had tried to assure him that these problems were just typical industry struggles. Turnover in food service was always high, and complaints were to be expected. But Nathan wasn't convinced. He wanted to know the truth, and he knew he couldn't find it in a spreadsheet. So, on a quiet Tuesday morning, he made a bold decision. He would go undercover, not as an executive observing from the sidelines, but as a worker living the reality of his frontline employees. With the help of a trusted assistant, he created a fake identity: Ben Carter, a new kitchen assistant at one of the busiest Roast & Co. locations. The job would be tough, no doubt, but Nathan knew there was no better way to truly understand what was happening in his stores. By the next morning, Nathan had trimmed his neatly styled beard, swapped his tailored suits for a simple black t-shirt and jeans, and traded his expensive loafers for well-worn sneakers. As he stood outside the crowded downtown location, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air, a wave of uncertainty washed over him. Was he ready for this? Could he keep up with the fast-paced environment? More importantly, what would he uncover about his own company? Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. For the next 2 weeks, he wouldn't be CEO Nathan Reynolds. He would just be Ben, just another worker trying to make it through the day. As soon as Nathan, now Ben, stepped into the downtown Roast & Co. location, the overwhelming chaos of the morning rush hit him like a freight train. The cafe was packed, with a long line snaking out the door. The sounds of whirring espresso machines, clattering cups, and customers shouting complicated orders blended into a relentless hum of activity. The air was thick with the rich scent of coffee and the unmistakable stress of an overworked team struggling to keep up. Employees darted between stations in a frantic but practiced rhythm, their movements quick, efficient, and exhausted. Nathan barely had time to process the scene before a gruff voice snapped him out of his thoughts. "You the new guy?" Alex, the store manager, barely spared him a glance as he flipped through a clipboard, already looking impatient. Dressed in a crisp, logo-branded polo and exuding authority, Alex's sharp, uninterested tone made it clear that training new hires was just another inconvenience in his already packed day. "Jasmine, show him the ropes," he said dismissively, before striding away to check on inventory. Jasmine, a barista in her late 20s with sharp eyes and a tired but kind expression, gave Nathan a once-over before sighing. "All right, Ben, let's start with the basics," she said, tying her apron tighter. She looked like she'd done this 100 times before. Despite her weariness, she patiently guided him to the back of the store, where piles of dirty dishes and overstuffed trash cans awaited. "You'll be handling dishes and prep for now," she explained, handing him a rag and motioning toward the never-ending stack of mugs and plates. Nathan wasn't expecting luxury, but the back-of-house conditions surprised him. The air was thick with steam, the dish pit was a tiny cramped space, and the floor was already slick with spilled coffee and melted ice. With no time to hesitate, he rolled up his sleeves and got to work, plunging his hands into the scorching water, scrubbing away at mugs stained with dried espresso. Minutes turned into hours as the relentless pace never let up. He barely had a moment to breathe, let alone keep up with the demanding, physically exhausting work. Occasionally, Jasmine would check in on him between orders, moving with the speed and precision of someone who had long accepted this as her daily reality. "It's always like this," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. "You get used to it, or you don't." By midday, Nathan's arms ached, his back throbbed, and he was starting to understand why employees were burning out. He hadn't sat down once, and breaks seemed non-existent. The expectation was simple: work until you physically can't anymore. Watching the team operate, he realized they weren't just making coffee, they were fighting to survive their shift. As Nathan lifted another heavy tray of dishes, he thought back to his comfortable office, where complaints like these had just been abstract reports on a screen. Now, for the first time, they were real. By the time the morning rush finally slowed, Nathan felt like he had been hit by a truck. His arms throbbed from endlessly scrubbing dishes, and his back ached from hours of standing without a break. He had assumed food service was tough, but experiencing it firsthand was something else entirely. As he wiped down the prep counter, he stole a glance at the rest of the team. They looked just as exhausted as he felt, but unlike him, they had no end in sight. Across the cafe, Jasmine, who had been bouncing between the espresso machine and the register all morning, rubbed her temples, trying to fight off the tension that had clearly built up. She hadn't stopped moving once, yet she still seemed to be carrying more than her fair share of the workload. Meanwhile, Liam, a young cashier, struggled to count back change to a customer, his hands slightly shaking from sheer exhaustion. He had been working since 5 a.m. and still had hours left in his shift. Nathan overheard him mention to a coworker that he was picking up extra shifts just to afford tuition, but even with all his effort, he was barely getting by. The cafe was critically understaffed, a fact that became clearer with every passing hour. Employees were constantly forced to cover multiple roles, jumping from one station to another just to keep things running. The lack of proper staffing meant longer shifts, no real breaks, and an endless workload. Nathan caught Jasmine popping a painkiller between orders, a clear sign that the job was taking a physical toll. Yet no one complained outright. They just pushed through the exhaustion, knowing that speaking up wouldn't change a thing. When Nathan hesitantly asked why they didn't request more help, Jasmine gave a bitter chuckle. "Corporate doesn't care," she muttered, shaking her head. "They just tell us to work smarter, but really they just want us to work more." For the first time, Nathan felt the weight of those complaints in a way he never had before. The policies he had signed off on, the cost-cutting measures that had seemed so logical on paper, they weren't just numbers. They were people, and those people were suffering. Nathan had barely caught his breath when Alex, the store manager, reappeared, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the cafe like a hawk. Unlike the rest of the team, he didn't seem fazed by the chaos or exhaustion hanging in the air. Instead, he moved with a detached efficiency, barking orders without so much as a second glance at the people carrying them out. Nathan quickly realized that Alex wasn't the type of leader who jumped in to help when things got tough. He was the type who stood back and criticized from a distance. "Liam, move faster, we don't have all day," Alex snapped as the young cashier fumbled to bag a customer's order. When Liam apologized and rushed to fix his mistake, Alex just scoffed. "Trying isn't good enough," he muttered before walking away. Nathan clenched his jaw. This wasn't leadership, it was intimidation. Instead of building his team up, Alex kept them in a constant state of fear, making them feel as though they were one mistake away from being replaceable. In contrast, Jasmine was the one who kept the cafe running smoothly. Whenever an order backed up, she jumped in without hesitation, not because it was her job, but because she refused to let the team drown. She checked on coworkers, made sure Liam was okay after Alex's scolding, and even handed Nathan a quick snack when she noticed he hadn't eaten. At one point, when Nathan hesitated at the espresso machine, unsure of the next step, Jasmine nudged him aside and calmly explained. "I've been doing this for 5 years, she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. You learn that no one's going to make this job easier for you. You just survive it. Nathan could hear the resignation in her voice. Jasmine wasn't just managing orders, she was managing morale, picking up the slack where corporate and Alex had failed, and yet no one recognized her for it. As Nathan wiped sweat from his brow, a realization settled in. The problem wasn't just understaffing or long hours. It was the culture of indifference at the management level. Corporate didn't listen, store managers like Alex didn't care, and employees like Jasmine and Liam, they were the ones suffering for it. The cafe had just hit its second wave of rush hour, and the tension in the air was palpable. Nathan was restocking lids near the register when he noticed Liam at the counter, his hands trembling as he struggled to enter a complicated order into the system. The customer waiting on the other side was impatient, drumming their fingers against the counter with an audible sigh. The cafe was understaffed as usual, and Liam was trying to do the job of two people, all while keeping up with Alex's impossible expectations. Then it happened. Liam hit the wrong button. The register beeped loudly, and he fumbled to correct the mistake, but his nervous hands only made things worse. The customer groaned loudly, rolling their eyes, and before Liam could recover, Alex stormed over. "What the hell are you doing?" Alex hissed, his voice sharp and loud enough for the entire cafe to hear. Liam froze, his face flushing red as he tried to explain. "I just pressed the wrong—" "I don't care," Alex snapped, cutting him off. "We don't have time for your screw-ups. If you can't handle a basic task, maybe this isn't the job for you." The cafe fell silent for a moment. Customers stole glances at the scene, some looking uncomfortable, others just ignoring it, as if this kind of treatment was normal. Liam looked like he wanted to disappear. Nathan felt something snap inside him. Without thinking, he stepped forward, placing a hand on Liam's shoulder. "Hey, it's okay," Nathan said calmly, looking Liam in the eye. "Take a breath. We've got this." Liam gave him a grateful but hesitant glance, his fingers still twitching over the register. But Alex wasn't done. He turned his glare to Nathan. "Focus on your own job, rookie," Alex said coldly. "I don't need you playing the hero." Nathan bit back his anger, knowing he couldn't reveal himself, not yet. But in that moment, he saw just how broken the system was. The employees weren't just overworked and exhausted. They were humiliated, treated like machines instead of people. As Liam took a shaky breath and continued ringing up the order, Nathan made a silent vow. This had to change. The weight of what Nathan had witnessed with Liam's public humiliation still sat heavy on his mind as he followed Jasmine into the tiny, dimly lit break room for a rare moment of rest. The contrast between this cramped, worn-out space and the sleek corporate offices he was used to was staggering. The paint on the walls was peeling, one of the overhead lights flickered obnoxiously, and the chairs wobbled with every shift of weight. It was nothing like the polished, modern lounges at the company's headquarters, because here no one was thinking about employee comfort. Jasmine sank into a chair, stretching her sore arms before grabbing a granola bar from her bag. "No time to actually eat a meal," she muttered, unwrapping it with practiced efficiency. Across the table, Liam sat hunched over, still visibly shaken from Alex's earlier outburst. No one comforted him. Not because they didn't care, but because this was normal. They were used to it. As Nathan sat down with them, he listened to their conversation. It wasn't just about long hours or exhaustion anymore. The real frustration ran deeper. "We've sent complaints," Luis, another barista, chimed in. "Emails about broken equipment, requests for better scheduling, never get a response." Jasmine scoffed. "Corporate doesn't read them, or if they do, they don't care." Nathan felt the words like a punch to the gut. He had signed off on policies, reviewed monthly reports, and attended meetings about efficiency, but not once had he stopped to truly listen to the people who kept his company running. Sitting here, hearing their exhaustion, their anger, their disappointment, he realized just how deeply disconnected he had become. He glanced at Liam, still poking at his food, clearly drained. "Liam," he asked carefully, "if you could change one thing about this job, what would it be?" Liam let out a humorless laugh. "A schedule that doesn't break me." Jasmine nodded. "Better staffing. Actual breaks." Luis added, "A manager who actually has our backs." Nathan took a deep breath, his mind racing. These weren't impossible requests, They weren't asking for luxury, just dignity. For the first time, he didn't just see them as employees, he saw them as people, and he had failed them. Nathan had always believed he was a good leader, but after everything he had seen, he realized he had been leading from a distance, relying on reports, numbers, and second-hand accounts instead of truly understanding the people behind the work. That had to change. Over the next few days, he made a conscious effort to integrate himself into the team, not just as an observer, but as a real worker. He didn't just wash dishes, he volunteered for the worst tasks, jumped in when the baristas were overwhelmed, and even helped Liam at the register when the line got long. At first, some of the team still treated him like an outsider, assuming he wouldn't last, but slowly, something shifted. "Most new hires can't keep up," Jasmine commented one evening as they scrubbed down the espresso machine together. "But you actually try. You care." Nathan froze for a moment, her words hitting him harder than he expected. How many of his employees had spent years feeling like no one in the corporate cared about them? How many times had they given feedback, voiced concerns, and been ignored? He had thought that signing checks and approving budgets made him a responsible leader, but what mattered most was listening, something he had never truly done. During a rare quiet moment, Nathan started asking the team subtle but pointed questions. If they could change one thing, what would it be? What frustrated them the most? The answers weren't surprising anymore. Better staffing, flexible scheduling, and appreciation for their hard work. When he asked Liam how he was holding up, the young cashier just gave a tired shrug. "I'm trying to balance school and work, but I'm burning out," he admitted. "I asked for fewer shifts, but Alex wouldn't approve it. Said I should toughen up or find another job." Nathan felt his jaw clench. How many others had been pushed to the brink like this? How many had walked away from a job they once loved because leadership refused to see them as human? For the first time in years, Nathan felt a sense of real responsibility, not as a CEO trying to run a company, but as a leader who had a duty to his people. He had been blind to their struggles for too long. That was about to change. Nathan had planned to wait a few more days before revealing his true identity, but after everything he had witnessed, Alex's toxic leadership, Liam's struggles, Jasmine's exhaustion, he knew he couldn't delay any longer. These employees deserved more than just another corporate promise. They deserved real change, and it had to start now. After the chaotic morning rush, when the cafe had finally settled into a quieter rhythm, Nathan took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Hey," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "can everyone gather for a quick meeting before we clock out?" Jasmine wiped her hands on her apron and shot him a curious look. Liam and Luis exchanged glances, unsure of what was coming. Even Alex, usually too busy checking numbers to care, leaned against the counter with a skeptical expression. Once everyone was assembled, Nathan pulled off his baseball cap, ran a hand through his hair, and took a deep breath. "I need to tell you all something," he began, his voice clear but full of emotion. "My name isn't Ben, it's Nathan Reynolds." The room went dead silent. Jasmine's eyes widened in shock, Liam's jaw dropped slightly, and Louise let out a low whistle. Even Alex's posture stiffened, his usual air of authority suddenly cracking. Nathan continued before anyone could react. "I'm the CEO of Roast & Co., and I came here undercover because I needed to see the truth for myself, what it's really like working in one of our cafes. And what I've seen," he looked around the room, meeting each of their eyes, "it's unacceptable." Jasmine folded her arms, her expression unreadable. "So, what? You played spy for a few weeks? What happens now?" Nathan nodded, understanding the skepticism. "I don't blame you for doubting me," he admitted. "You've been let down before. But I swear to you, this isn't just an experiment. It's the beginning of change." Liam spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Like, what kind of change?" Nathan pulled out his phone, flipping to a growing list of notes he had made over the past 2 weeks. Better staffing, flexible scheduling, direct communication between employees and corporate, and most importantly, real recognition for the work you all do. Because I've seen it firsthand now. You're the ones holding this company together. The room stayed quiet, the tension lingering. But there was something else now, a shift, a glimmer of hope. Jasmine narrowed her eyes, then slowly nodded. "All right, boss. We'll hold you to that." Nathan exhaled. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Nathan didn't waste time. The day after his big reveal, he returned to corporate headquarters, not as the distant CEO who made decisions from an ivory tower, but as a leader determined to fix what was broken. The first thing he did was restructure the scheduling system, ensuring that employees like Liam wouldn't be forced into grueling shifts that made it impossible to balance work and life. He introduced a flexible scheduling policy that gave employees more control over their hours, allowing them to request changes without fearing retaliation. Next came staffing and pay. Nathan worked with HR to increase wages, provide better benefits, and hire additional employees to prevent existing staff from being overworked. He also set up regional check-ins, where corporate leadership would spend time in cafes, not to observe, but to work alongside employees and experience their struggles firsthand. But perhaps the biggest change was communication. He established a direct feedback system, allowing employees to voice their concerns without fear of being ignored or punished. Every message, every complaint, and every suggestion would go directly to corporate leadership, and to him personally. At first, there was skepticism. Some managers, including Alex, resisted the changes, arguing that it would slow efficiency and cost too much. Nathan didn't waver. "Efficiency doesn't come from overworked employees," he told his executive team. "It comes from people who feel valued." Within weeks, the shift was noticeable. Employees began to trust that change was real. The endless cycle of burnout was finally being broken. For the first time in years, Roast & Co. was becoming what it was meant to be, a company that cared about its people. A few months later, Nathan found himself standing outside the same Roast & Co. cafe where his journey had begun. But this time, he wasn't wearing a disguise. He was here as himself, the CEO, but also a leader who had finally learned what that title should mean. As he stepped inside, he could immediately sense the difference. The tension that once filled the air was gone. The team moved with purpose, but without the frantic exhaustion he had once seen. Behind the counter, Liam stood at the register, smiling as he handled orders with confidence. When their eyes met, Liam gave him a nod, not the nervous, uncertain one from before, but one of recognition and quiet gratitude. Jasmine, now promoted to store manager, worked at the espresso machine, expertly crafting drinks while cracking jokes with the new hires. When she spotted Nathan, she smirked. "Well, look who's back," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Checking in on us, or just craving a latte?" Nathan chuckled. "A little of both." She crossed her arms, studying him. "I won't lie, I didn't think corporations would actually follow through, but you did." Nathan nodded, feeling the weight of those words. "Because you all deserved better, and I won't stop making sure you get it." Around him, he saw what real change looked like, not just in policies, but in people, employees who felt heard, valued, and respected. The company he had built was no longer just about profits, it was about the people who made it thrive. For the first time in years, Nathan felt something he hadn't before. Pride, not in numbers, but in the people behind them. The biggest lesson from Nathan's journey is that true leadership isn't about numbers, it's about people. For years, he ran Roast & Co. from a corporate office, making decisions based on spreadsheets, reports, and profit margins. But it wasn't until he worked alongside his employees that he understood the real cost of those decisions. Exhausted workers, toxic management, and a company culture that valued efficiency over well-being. His experience proved that leaders must be present, engaged, and willing to listen. Policies that look good on paper can be disastrous in practice if they ignore the human impact. He saw firsthand how bad management can break morale and how real change comes from giving employees a voice, fair treatment, and the respect they deserve. Ultimately, Nathan learned that a company's success isn't just measured in profits, but in the satisfaction and well-being of its people. By investing in his employees, he didn't just improve their working conditions, he strengthened the entire business. The best leaders don't just manage from above, they step into the shoes of those they lead and make changes that truly matter.